Hi, today I'm going to teach you how to make this pair of leggings. I got the pattern from a Threads magazine from quite a long time ago, and then I've adapted it to have a yoke and a pocket. So you take your personal measurements and then plot out your legging pattern, and then you end up with this. So this one, like I mentioned, I added a yoke, so I did a V-shaped yoke on the front and more so like a bigger dip on the back. Out of that pocket, it only has an inseam, no outseam, and so the outseam is your fold line, and then it has a twin needle hem. Hi, in this video I'm going to go over cutting out your pants for your assignment. So I have taken my fabric here and I have folded it on the cross grain rather than on grain. With knits, this is something that sometimes needs to be done. And I was struggling getting the fabric to lay perfectly on that cross grain because I could just barely see that it was just off slightly. So I tried tracing it down this edge, or drawing my line down this edge, to see if I could get it to be aligned. But when I brought this over, the fabric was twisted and did not look aligned. So I just carefully lifted it and set it down until it looked like it was in alignment for me. So this line is a little bit off. The way I'm laying my pattern piece out, though, I'm not too worried because it's down near the ankle and it's only going to be a little bit. And then I'll be putting my yoke pieces on there. So I'm going to take my pattern and place it on here. And I'm going to bring it up as much as possible, and I'm just double checking that I have both layers here. You don't want to lay it out and then find that you do not have both of those layers underneath there. So then I'm going to measure at the widest part of my pattern from the grain line to the fold, and then I'm going to come down here and measure from the fold to the grain line. Now mine is not aligned, so I'm just going to take some pins, and right here at that widest part where I measured it, I'm going to anchor my fabric. And again, I don't care what the number is, just as long as I remember the number. And when I put it down here, you'll see that it's not aligned. So I'm going to bring this over, pattern piece over, and I don't want to drag it because it's on a knit and it could drag the fabric with it. So I'm just kind of giving it like a little parachute by like creating an air pocket that I can move the fabric without dragging it. Okay, so once I know that that is in position, I'm going to put another pin in it to lock it down. And then I'm going to grab my yoke pieces here. Now I have my two yoke pieces and they both need to be cut on a fold. However, if I place this on the fold, then I either would have to turn it this way, which would mean that my words are upside down, and I do not want that. So I actually need to flip it this way in order to get it to fit properly on my fold here. And I'm going to pin that in position. And then my other piece also needs to be placed on a fold. And I didn't quite give myself enough room here, so that means I need to move this pattern piece over. So I'm going to squeeze that down as much as I can. Squeeze that in position. And place that there, and then reposition this so that it's about 1/2 inch over. So I'm going to go up and over that 1/2 inch, which means I will have to remeasure everything. So from here to here. And I'll again pin this in place and then come down here and measure. And it's only a little off, but the longer your pattern piece, the more accurate you need to be with that grain line. Otherwise you will get twisting. And if you see like a little wrinkle like that, I just kind of pat it, and then that will encourage the fabric to lay flat. Okay, so then from there, if I was cutting this with scissors, I would pin quite frequently, like every 4 inches, so about a hand width apart, making sure I get every corner really well and keeping those pins away from the edge. And when you're putting your pins in, scoop like soup. Don't stab it like you have a fork. So you don't want to stab and bend. You want to scoop it like you're eating soup. Okay, that scooping gives you less distortion when you're cutting it out. Okay, so then my next step will be to cut it out. I'm going to be using a rotary cutter, so I don't necessarily need to pin this completely. The next part of the video, I'm going to show you how my original pattern had this full waistline going all the way up to my natural waist, but I'm turning this pant into a yoke waistline, and so this yellow line here represents where I want to cut it off so I can sew it on here. So I show in the video how I take my ruler and use it on that yellow line, and I just flip back this fabric and I push on the ruler and the fabric in order to get that line, and I'll just move my ruler where it needs to be in order to continue that line across. So I'm just marking right against the fabric there, and then that last little bit that I missed over here, again just pushing on the ruler and the fabric, and then you can see how I end up getting that line. So here I had a little bit of distortion, so I just want to make sure I blend that out and this will allow me to fold this out of my way and then cut it without cutting my pattern. Up here on my top edge, because I'm adding the yoke, I'm not going to be using my full waistband. However, I don't want to cut through here, so I'm going to trace it directly onto my fabric using some chalk and my rulers, so I can see that my waistband used this curve, so I'm going to fold that out of my way and just lightly chalk underneath that, and then I'll slide my ruler over here and do the same thing with this section. And then with the last section, it's on a slight curve this way. I'm just pushing against the ruler and the fabric and lifting the pattern piece up so that I've chalk lined that waistline. Okay, so I don't have to pin it and I don't have to worry about cutting it out. Okay, so now I'm going to use my rotary cutter. Because I am right-handed, I'm going to be cutting counterclockwise all the way around my pattern piece. That way I can always see the pattern and I can cut right next to it. Otherwise, I might accidentally cut too much or too little away from the pattern. So as I'm cutting, if I see that the fabric bubbles at all, even a little bit, I'm going to back off just a hint and make sure that it's flat. I don't want to saw this. I want a nice smooth cut, and then I'm going to angle that away, and then that should be cut in one continuous go. When you're checking, pull the piece that you don't want away. Don't try to lift the piece that you're cutting out. So cutting across there, and then straight down here. And I'm just looking for any like rippling or distortion as I cut. So as soon as I see it, while maintaining pressure, back off a little. But we're not sawing this. If you have to saw this, you need a new blade. And you need to, for knits, you must try to, right there, do this as clean as possible, like smooth and clean. I'm just taking that straight down to there. Okay. And then again, when I check this, I'm pulling away that piece. Now for this, I'm going to have to come at it from this, and I'll probably be blocking the view of the camera. So let's see if I can rotate this around so you can see better. I don't really like this because of the angle of the cut, but I don't want to lift it up because when you move knits, it distorts the fabric. So especially on the cross grain, I do have to back off just ever so slightly with every inch or so that I don't get that bubble, because the cross grain is, well, in this case it's the grain, but going this way, it can be quite stretchy. And then I'm just going to go up this side again, always going counterclockwise around my pattern. Okay, so I'm just going to rotate this again. And then I'm just going to run my fingernail underneath just to see where I stopped, which is right there. And then I will keep going. Actually, probably should just rotate the camera along this way. Just going to go right across this top. I'm getting a little bit more bubbling, so I'm just, anytime I just back off just ever so little bit. And then that becomes my front and back. Okay, I'm going to move this just because I know that I've done it, and finish my last little bit. Just be really careful. Fingers and fabric. And then my last cut will be my yoke pieces, and then I've also cut out or pinned my pocket, but I'm going to use pocket lining rather than knit lining rather than this. That way it'll be a little bit thinner. So I'm using some tricot instead of this. And then once I get everything cut, I want to make sure I put any notches or matching points on my fabric. So this one, because that is just such a hard angle, and it's small enough, I will carefully lift it. Notice I'm not dragging it across the table and rotating it that way. And I was able to cut this on the cross grain because this is a 4-way stitch fabric, and it has a very forgiving, or it has good recovery in both directions. Okay, so I have my pocket placement here. Actually, this says I need to cut 2, so I'm going to be using this band, and I will end up opening this up and cutting another one of these here and cutting another one of these here as a yoke. I'm now going to cut out the rest of my waistband facing. So I already cut one of this one, and it said cut 2 on a fold, so I need a second one to be my facing. And then same thing with this one. I have this here, and so I'm going to cut my second set. So that long strip that was at the bottom, I separated it and refolded it, and then on the cross grain so that I could cut out 2 more. Remember, when you do see me doing a little back and forth, I never remove the blade off the table. I'm always keeping that firm pressure so that it doesn't end up looking like lightning bolt cuts. It's nice and clean and smooth. And I know that sometimes it looks like I'm going a lot, but it's very small, like less than a 1/4 inch back, because I'm always watching for that bubble before it comes, more like 1/8 of an inch back. Like it's just a subtle backwards. If I go more than that, like I don't know if you can see here, but it will end up creating an uneven cut. So let's cut that right off. And you want to try to keep this as clean and smooth as possible. All right. So now I'm going to cut out my pocket. So my pocket is made with, or like I mentioned, is a lightweight tricot. So it won't add bulk inside my leggings. And I like to come like off the edge instead of starting on the fabric. That way I know when I pull this off, it will be nice and clean. Like that. Like that. I will, since this is small, I will pick it up and rotate it for my last cut. And again, try not to drag it, lift and set it down, especially if it's small. If it's big, you're kind of stuck in the position it's in. So having access to the side and edges of the table is ideal. All right, so again, I'm going to mark my placement lines on everything, and I'm just going to use chalk. So this is a talc chalk. Goes on quite easily, but it also comes off quite easily. So I just want to make sure that I don't move this around too much, otherwise I'll lose my marks. If I know I'm going to be moving this a lot, I'll use a wax chalk, but you always want to check that to make sure it comes off when you do that. And I'm marking the top and the bottom pieces so that I have it, but not the inside. Okay. And then I'll do that, repeat that on my yoke where the pocket actually goes. And then I will stabilize this along the pocket opening with a bit of interfacing, but I'm going to make sure that the stretch goes this way, just like the stretch of my fabric. Okay. On this area of the pocket, like I mentioned, I'm going to interface it. So I have gotten out some interfacing, and I'm just checking so it's not stretchy this way and it is stretchy this way. So I want to cut 1-inch strips this way so that I can interface this section where I'm putting that pocket. So my seam allowance is 1/2 inch, so I'm just going to do a 1-inch strip there. I'm going to true up my seam here based on my green line. Still, that last cut was not straight, and I'm just going to use my mat as a guide. So this one's really shifting on me, so I just have to be careful. And since I have the yolk and of 2 yolks, I'm going to interface both sides of that yolk. So I'm just going to cut a couple of extra strips. When at the ironing board, you are going to go ahead and cover your ironing board with something to prevent the adhesive from fusing through onto the ironing board. And then I also like to add a bit of moisture as well as steam. And then I like to cover up my pieces with an additional piece so that I do not get it sticking to my iron. Be careful when pressing your knits. It can leave iron shine if you press too hard. So don't press too hard, and you're just going to hold that on there for 15 seconds or as directed by your instructions. So no wiggling. And make sure you set it to the right temperature. There are a few fusibles that do not require moisture. And then you'll let that cool. And then once cool, you will test it out and make sure that it's ironed on properly. So I just find that I don't like having to clean interfacing off my iron. So that's why I put the sheet here. Okay, so once cool, you can test that. So as long as it doesn't come off, you're good. And then it should still have stretch to it after it's applied if you've cut it properly. Now I have, like I showed you when I was cutting it out, this leg piece is, it's a left front and back and a right front and back, but my yoke is a whole front and a whole back, which is why I have opposite areas here, because when this leg gets sewn at the center front, then it will join and I'll be able to attach my pocket to it there. Okay, the next step is going to be sewing this pocket bag on. And so you can see how it is sewn in the yoke here. And it appears to be top stitched here and here. Now you're going to top stitch it at the bottom after you've sewn it to your pant, but you're not going to top stitch it at the top until it's time to attach your yoke to your facing to the yoke. So, and this needs to be an exact opening. So when you're stitching the bag onto the pant and the yoke, you're going to stop and start exactly here and here and then clip it into place. So the next step, as I mentioned, I'm going to show you the steps to sewing that on. So it just looks like that on the outside, and then it is a separate pocket bag on the inside. So I'm going to add it here and here onto the front, and then when I sew the center fronts together, then it will this will be in the right spot. Okay, so I just have a slight angle here, so I want to make sure that I am putting this at the proper angle. And I marked the wrong side, so I need to make sure I sew it with the right sides together. And I need to remark my pocket placement. So I'm just going to do that now. So I just know where to put those marks on there. So I'm just going to line up this notch together. So that notch to that notch. Now, since this will be completely encased, I am not going to serge it. I'm just going to use the sewing machine with one of my zigzag or stretch stitches so that it doesn't break the seams. Just make sure your pins are not dull and damaging your fabric. These ones are nice and sharp. Okay, when sewing your pocket on, my pocket opening, I need to be able to clip the seam allowance and flip the pocket in, but still be able to sew this onto the pant. So I am going to start exactly where that pocket opening begins. I have it set up for a lock stitch. So I'm just going to lock stitch it in place. That's 3 stitches in the exact same spot, and then I'm going to sew with my stretch stitch across. And lock stitch it again. And then that will allow me to cut that. Now, ideally, I should have done a reinforcement stitch, but I'm relying on my interfacing to work for me like that. And then I am going to just cut at a slight diagonal that deters fraying, or unraveling in this case. And then that will allow me to flip my pocket bag towards my seam allowance and then do an understitch across there. So my seam allowance is still going this to the right, and then my pocket bag I'm going to place on top. I'm going to lengthen my stitch here. I'm still going to use a slight zigzag, but I'm just going to lengthen it. I don't need this to be strong. I just need to hold this pocket down so it doesn't pop out. Lock stitching at it again. And then these seams will be flipped up like this to match so that I can sew that onto my pant. I'm now going to repeat that on the other side. Starting with my lock stitch. And with that lock stitch, clip into my corners. And you want to clip right to your stitches. Do not cut your stitches. If you don't go far enough, then it will not turn nicely. And it could just be the difference between one little thread stopping it. And understitching is when you're sewing your facing to your seam allowance or your pocket facing to your seam allowance. So if I hadn't clipped that enough, this would not be a perfect corner. It would have a pucker if I didn't clip it enough. If you clip it too much, you end up with a hole. Here I am going to top stitch the pocket opening to the pant. Just make sure it is nice and smooth and everything is aligned underneath there. I'm just going to do a couple of back stitches, I'm going to stitch a couple of stitches, then do a couple of back stitches. Make sure your thread is underneath your foot when you start, and then top stitch that pocket lining or pocket bag to the pant right across the top. Don't forget that gentlest of pulls too. And if you feel anything underneath, make sure you straighten it out. Alright, so my pocket lining is going up on both sides just as it should, which will allow me to then sew them together. Okay, the next step is to either do your inseam or your hem. That can depend on whether your hem is too narrow to fit on the arm of your machine. So if your hem is too narrow to fit on the arm of your machine, you're going to hem it first. So you would turn your hem in, whatever hem allowance you have on yours, and then I would sew it down flat like we talked about when you're doing your sleeve, and then you're going to fold it right sides together and sew up the inseam of your pant. If you have a machine that will fit a narrow hem into it, then you can sew your inseam first, then flip up your hem, and then you'll fit that tiny little band onto your machine. Either way, I do recommend that you interface the wrong side of your fabric before doing your inseam or your hem. That way it's nice and stable. Because I was doing a twin needle, I decided to do a 3-inch interfacing for a 1.5-inch hem, and then that way it was stable on both sides, and then my twin needle stitches didn't come out or pull. So it was very stable. It was as if I was doing it on a woven, but with some stretch. So again, if it's too narrow, like a legging, then you may want to hem it before you sew your inseams and your side seams. Okay, so my next step is going to be to sew my inseams together. So I'm just going to fold this one leg piece together. So remember, I have a pant pattern that this whole leg is the front and back joined, like not joined together, but just one whole piece. And so I am going to connect my 2 seams together, and then I'm going to take this to the serger, and we're just going to sew up that inseam. I've set up my serger for a super stretch stitch, and so I'm going to show you what that is. So to set up your machine for a super stretch stitch, mine uses 2 threads to do so. I have a little cap that goes on my upper looper here, and it has a wire that goes into my upper looper and prevents, or so that the lower looper thread bypasses it. To take it off, it is here, mine has a little, there. So my little device here, so has this wire here. So that is what goes into the upper looper, and then it has a little cap that clips onto the top of the upper looper here, and then it just locks in place here. So I'm going to put that back on. So just on like this, and then clips down there, and then I just take this wire and I put it in the hole. So when the stitches form, the lower looper just slips right over that little upper, like it catches right on the upper looper right there. And so I don't know if you can see it, but there's a thread coming right across there from the lower looper right here. And so it doesn't completely, and then that allows the upper looper to bring it up and get caught by the needle right there. The needle's going in front of it and locking it in place, and then the lower looper goes underneath, and that's how it forms. So it's just two threads forming that stitch. And so I haven't changed my tension or anything. I did put my machine on 1.5 differential and a slightly longer length of 3.5. Other than that, it's just regular setup for the inseam. I'm going to fold that right sides together. I'm going to start with my hem, one because I've already stabilized it and it's nice and strong. Actually, I'm going to use 3/8 inch seam allowance, which means I do need to cut off 1/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to lower that down. Just put that stitch finger back in place and trim off 1/8 of an inch as I go. So this stitch will allow the fabric to stretch and won't break. Just make sure your edges are aligned. So it has a nice elasticity. That means that it won't break when you go to put your leggings on or your pants or anything else. When I get closer to like past the knee area, I just want to make sure that my top crotch corners are aligned. Some patterns have a little bit of ease in the thigh area, so you want to stretch it gently. Making sure that they stay aligned in the corner, but that they get eased together in the thigh. Okay, so I have my two corners matching there. And this nice stretch, no breakage for my 4-way stretch fabric. On my other leg, I'm going to start from the crotch down. This just ensures that they get eased in the same. If you don't have any easing, you can do directional sewing where you do it from the bottom up both legs. Again, matching my corners and my edges. All right, once both legs are sewn on the inseam, you can join them at the crotch seam. So I have both my inseams sewn, and I have one leg right side out and one leg inside out. I'm going to place the right side out leg inside the inside out leg. That will make them right sides together. And then I'm going to find the crotch curves of both pieces and and match those up. Now, I do like to double stitch my crotch seam, even though it's being serged. I'm going to pin this, and especially so the U of the crotch seam, and then afterwards I will serge it, and that also helps me align this crotch seam so it's exactly aligned, and helps me with the stitching, that curve, because I have it pinned. So be sure to match your notches if you have any. 2 notches is the back, 1 notch is the front. Generally, sometimes there'll be 3 on the back. All right, I'll take that to the machine. And at the machine, I'm just going to lock stitch that in. So I am using my stretch stitch again. And so that right across. When you get to this seam, or this intersection, don't take that pin out until you've sewn across it. And right there at the pin, stop, take that out, and then keep going. And then we'll go to the serger. At the serger, I'm just going to trim off that 1/8 again. And that gives me a nice strong crotch seam with lots of stretch. When I reach inside and grab both legs, I now have my pants sewn at the front and at the back. And then, I don't know if you can see it, the lighting, but the crotch seam lined up fairly well. And my next step is to sew my facings together at the side seams and then join them together. So I have 2 fronts and 2 backs here. So I'm going to take my 2 pieces. I'm going to join opposite ones together. So there's one front, other front with a pocket. And I'll take my 2 back pieces and place them on top of each other, right sides together. And I can serge this right down each side seam. So just matching my corner and placing it into my serger so that I will trim off 1/8 of an inch. And repeat that on the other side. and the other yolk. So you'll notice I didn't cut them in between. Now I'll go back and cut them. And then I can place my 2 yolks together. So I'm going to turn one right side out. And keeping one inside out. And then just make sure you match your front to your back. So for me, my front is a lot more shallow than my back. I'm just going to match them up at the side seams. And I'm just going to alternate my side seams. They'll nestle in better when I go to serge across them. I want to match my centers. So that they all line up. And that way I also know that my points are all matching. And then take that over to the other side. So I'll end up with my yoke like this. And I'll serge all around the top. So I'm going to place this one seam allowance to the front, the other one towards the back, and when I get to the other side, I'm going to go the opposite direction. This, I do need to lift my pressure foot. I'll lift my needle up, and I'm going to trim off a little bit again. So I need, actually no, on this one, I intentionally left this with a narrower seam allowance, so I don't have to trim any off. But I will trim that tail off. Just lining up my edges. Lining up my centers. And lining up my other side seam. So when I get here, because I want that seam allowance to go that way, I just want to make sure that I lift this up and allow that to do that. And the one on the underside is going towards us. And again, line up your centers on the back. And all across that edge until you get to the other side seam. And when I get back to the other side where I started, my serging only really gets completely on around here. So I'm going to, even though it starts there. So that's a pretty big gap. So I want to overlap that at least an inch. And then I'm going to go an extra inch, but I'm angling this slightly so I won't accidentally cut anything off, but I'm still feeding it under the needle. And then that will give me a good 2 inches of overlap. So from here to here, I've got 2 inches where my serging's overlapping. At the top waistline, I added a bit of elastic along this edge on the inside, which you cannot see from the outside, but it is understitched once it is sewn in place. So the next step is to show you how to do that. Okay, so next I'm going to sew in a little bit of extra elastic here just to give me some extra support, because this is nearly a perfect fit. And I just want that extra bit of stability. So I'm going to sew that in. So my elastic for my waist is 34, and I've reduced the elastic to 30. Okay, so I have some elastic here, and I'm going to sew this together. So I've measured my 30 inches. I'm going to then do a zigzag stitch across here. And just make sure your elastic is not twisted. Oh, and do your zigzag stitch. There you go. And then quarter it. By folding it in half, and then refold it, matching those halfway points, and mark it again. And then if you're uncertain about your waistline, you would do the same thing. I have my halfway points already marked by my side seams. Centers, you can mark those as well, or if you've ironed them off or anything. Okay. And once you have those marked, I always like my thicker elastic piece to be at the center back. I'm going to be putting this on and then understitching after. So I want to make sure, so my elastic's just a tiny bit smaller than my waistband. Well, 4 inches smaller, so about an inch smaller per section. I'm going to secure that in place so I can pull it and stretch it to match. Okay, so you're going to place this into the machine. I've pinned it all the way around, and then I'm going to start pulling. Remember, I have a 1 inch stretch per section, so I just want to pull gently. Taking out my pins as I go. And I'm always stopping with my needle down to help me as a third hand. Here, when I started, it was off a little bit, so I'm just going to open up those stitches a little. Just the nice thing about the zigzag is they can come out pretty easily, especially if you have a good seam ripper. And I'm just going to align it again so it's on the fabric instead of barely on the fabric. And then just lock stitch at the end. So, or back stitch. Alright, so that's right on my edge, all the way around, and then when I flip this, my elastic won't add any extra height, but it will add a little bit of extra stability at the top, and it won't be seen because I sewed it to the seam allowance. Once you have added that elastic and to your, if you're adding elastic, you would add your elastic to your yoke, and then I understitched it to the inside of the pant, not to the one that had the pocket attached, but the other one. And then I'm going to place these right sides together, matching those centers. So I'm just going to really emphasize that point here, so I know it lines up exactly with that center front. And then same thing on my center back. I have a 5 or 3/8 inch seam allowance, so I want that point to be really clear because that's where I'm going to pivot and go the other direction. And if I don't pivot there, then if I don't see it, then I won't pivot in the right spot and my point could be off. So just like that there, and then the same thing on the front. It's a little bit more shallow, so I could make this a scoop instead of a point. Okay. And then with my 2 pocket pieces, those are the ones I'm joining first. So I'm just going to place this so that I can put it right sides together. So right at that point. And again, I want to match that center with my line. And this is a lot like my V-neck, so I want to start sewing with those aligned up. And I'm going to be sewing from this edge of my pocket opening around. After pinning my yoke to my pant, so I basted it in place, and then I also basted my pocket bag together. So I just basted this in so I can serge it. And I have not done the yoke facing it, so it's still up here unattached. So I just pinned the yoke all the way around. That was the one that had the pocket attached, and then I also basted around my pocket so that I can take it to the serger and serge around the pocket and then serge around the yoke. I am not going to cut the pocket bag. I'm just going to put this just next to it and go around. I am going to take off my blade because when I get around to the other side, I don't want to risk accidentally cutting that. So this piece I'm moving in and out is a stitch finger. It's right here. It determines your stitch width, so you want to make sure that that's in place if you want to have a wide stitch. So I'm always feeling with all my fingers to make sure there's nothing underneath when I'm serging, especially because there's that blade often. When you're doing a corner, so just past the corner, raise your needle, raise your pressure foot, loosen your needle tension a little bit just so you have a little bit of slack in there. Pull the fabric back just a fraction, like a 1/4 inch, so that the stitches that are formed on that stitch finger are off of it so that you can turn cleanly. And then put it in position so that your first stitch is going to hit that corner. Now the needle is at an angle towards you, so if you have it too far back, you're going to miss it. So just make sure you're pulling it just a little bit towards you so that that first stitch is right in the corner. So again, go to the edge, one stitch off, raise your needle, raise your pressure foot, loosen that needle thread, pull it back a fraction to get it off the stitch fingers, rotate, and bring the edge of the fabric right into that position where the needle will go into. And then when I get here, because I have to let go here, I want to just make sure that this keeps going. So I'm going to push towards the right with my left hand. So I get stitches all the way to the end. And then serge off the edge. And it should give you nice clean corners with no excessive loops. That thread is from my basting, but just like that. Okay, now I'm going to serge the yoke to the pant. Now I do need to trim this off a little bit, but I will have to be very careful when I get to the other end. So there's little lines on my foot here that tell me where the left needle position is, which is this one here. So I marked on my fabric where I need that to be. So I'm just pushing it in so I make sure I get it, and that way I know where to cut off. So that's my side seam. I get here, and this is my point. So I'm going to go off and then back on so it remains a point. I'm just keeping the extra out of the way. Here, where I'm getting back to my other side of my pocket, I need to make sure I don't cut the pocket. So I have to really keep that out of the way in order to serge it right to where I need it to be. So I opted in the front where it was a very shallow point not to do a point, but in the back, let's see how we did. So the point's okay, but I had a pucker, so I'm going to have to take out a couple of serging stitches and fix that. Other than that, I'm happy with it. So right here, my fabric puckered. So I'm going to take out a couple of needle stitches and release that. So See how I release that, and then I'm just going to serge over it again. So I'm going to overlap about 1 inch of my stitches, sew the hole, and then overlap again. And I'm going to remove the blade so I don't cut any of my old stitches. So one more pucker on either side. Okay. The next step is to pin the yoke down. So what's important here is keeping your seam allowance going in the same direction the whole time. I'm going to top stitch on the pant, and that's going to secure my yoke. The other thing you want to do is make sure that the yoke is extending down beyond the area that you're going to sew, and then it's flat and smooth. So I'm just holding my hand underneath here, and then I'm going to brace it while I pin it in place for those last few points, and then I'll take it to the machine and sew it. And then here where the pocket opening is, I'll just top stitch it above the pocket, and then it will not be closing my pocket up. Okay, so I'm going to sew my top stitching above the pocket first. So I just have this all smooth and flat. And then I'm going to top stitch across here. And then just back tack to secure. I'm going to stretch it just a little bit because I'm using a straight stitch, and I don't want it to pop when I'm wearing these. I'm just sewing carefully over the pins. Reinforcing at the other end. Okay, now I'm going to do my top stitch here. So it's going to look like it's continuing the pocket top stitching. So I need to place this into the machine so it becomes an extension of that. Again, I just want to make sure my yoke is smooth and flat, that everything under here is smooth and flat, because this is where I'm attaching the yoke. So. Back stitch to reinforce. And these pins are in backwards, and so they're stabbing me, but it's the best direction when you're pinning it in place to make it work. So just a gentle stretch just to get rid of that bubble. I don't want to actually stretch it out of shape. So here I have a bit of a lump, and I have this button on my foot, and the purpose of that button is to make sure my foot stays flat and not angled. If it's angled when I go over lumps, it can resist the fabric and make it hard to go through. So I'm going to sew just a little bit more so that my foot is angled. Then I'm going to push down on the front and push in that button, and if it stays, then the foot will stay locked in place and level. It's not staying, so I'm going to go a couple more stitches. And so it still doesn't think it's thick enough to need it, but I just know from experience that it really is. So I'm just going to, again, push it down, level that out so that my foot's level and not angled. Because with a knit, if it doesn't move, it'll just stretch that seam. So, and then I'm going to pivot. Try one more time to get it to go in, but it doesn't need it there. So we're going downhill now, so it shouldn't be needed. It's only for going uphill. So once in a while, I'll just double check that everything's flat, that your seam's going the right way, and that you can feel the yoke seam allowance underneath there. Just feeling which direction the seam is sewn down here, so I know which direction to sew it up. It should be going towards the back, or if I staggered it, yeah, there it is, okay. Then it should be going in opposite directions as the inside. And ideally, don't go over the pins, because if you hit one and it damages your needle, then every stitch after that will be damaging your fabric. But sometimes it can't be helped. So here is my center back V. So I'm just going to pivot when I get to the bottom. Again, my foot's kind of angled here, so I'm going to push that button in, and since it's not staying, I'm just going to hold it. That way my foot stays level. When I get to that seam, I'm going to turn. And again here, I want to just continue this so it looks like that's where my pocket was top stitched. Back stitch to reinforce. Alright, so there is your top stitching. Clean up your threads. Check for anything, problems on the inside, any places where it didn't hold or it puckered. Threads that need to be cut. Okay, I'm good. Next step will be the hem. So that's our pocket opening, our front, our back, our point. The next step is to do your hem. So I'm just going to mark my hem allowance. So my hem allowance is about 2 inches. Just going to mark that across on both sides. I've already interfaced this at 3 inches, so I'll have a good amount of stabilizer in there to keep it from getting stretched out. So I put in a 3 inches of stabilizer in there. And then I'm just going to fold this in at that 2-inch mark. And my stabilizer is, the stretchy way is going this way, not this way. That way I can get my ankle or this over my heel onto my ankle. And then I'll place this on the machine and stitch around it. Okay, so the next step I'm going to do is this twin needle stitch. To do that, I need to put 2 spools of thread or a bobbin and a spool of thread on my machine, and I'm going to thread that through just like I would normally, so across, down, up, down. Now I have the option of putting it on either side of my tension disc, so I do that. And then here, when I get to the needle, I've inserted a twin needle. So that's one needle or one shank with where it splits into 2. And so it looks like this. So like that. And so that allows me to thread each side individually. You still need to use your bobbin as usual. So, and then when I get to this last thread guide just above the needle here, this one right here, I do not put both threads through. I only put one through, and then that just keeps it from getting twisted up here in the needle area. Okay, so then I'm now going to show you. So this is the machine I have that has a very skinny arm, which makes it very convenient to do sleeves and hems. So I've already pre-measured with my piece of tape here how wide it goes, since I don't have a plate that goes that wide. I'm going to start on the seam and place this into position under there, lining it up here. And then I've set this up for a straight stitch with the very smallest, like 0.5 zigzag. But if you do that, you need to just make sure that your needle is going to clear the plate. So I'm over here on the left, and then it's going to come over and do just a hint on the right, just because it's my ankle and I want to be able to get my heel through. I just want the slightest hint of a zigzag. But if you're doing a twin needle, don't do it too wide, otherwise that needle will hit the foot and or the plate and break, and then you've just wasted your money on your twin needle. So make sure you backstitch. We are going to be going all the way around, but I just do one backstitch because I do find that the twin needle on stretch can come out easily. And then I'm just going to guide this all the way around. I'm not going to go over pins on a twin needle just because I don't want it to break. And ideally stopping with the needle down, not up, when you're taking things and moving it around is better. And when you get back to your starting point, I do like to cut my threads before I go over them so I don't make a mess. And then you're going to go right over it, and again, backstitching a little. And there if you don't have a twin needle, there are lots of different hem stitches you can use. So then I will brush off my marks here, and then that's what it should look like. Okay. Okay, so this is my finished pants. So I have done a twin needle hem. You can see that it has some shape to it along the calf and the thigh, and then it has a pocket here, and then a yoke waistband with that V in the back. Just turn this so you can see it in the light better. So here you go, like that. So it has a yoke waistband, so when it stretches out, it'll look flat and nice. And then this is more of a dipped waistband in the front, like this. Okay. And that's our finished pant.